Looking around at the paintings in this exhibition, it's easy to see why the Australian War Memorial chose Ben Quilty as their official war artist. The swathes of thick paint, exploding colours and contorted shell-shocked faces staring out at you bring home the human cost of being a soldier in Afghanistan. Ben's interest in the male experience of war started in his teens.
We were a middle-class family in a middle-class suburb, very beautiful environment with a lot of sort of the natural bush still there, and you couldn't really hope for a better upbringing for three little boys. But then one after another at 18 years old, all three of us, one after the other, me first as the eldest son, went mad. Like really seriously engaged with the drug culture, with alcohol, with driving cars like maniacs. And I look back on it now and think that in a way, I think in Western civilization there is no initiation processes for young men. And I'm so interested in Indigenous culture that some of their young male initiation ceremonies take 13 years. In Australia we have an 18th birthday party, which is one night of debaucherous alcohol abuse, and then we wake up the next morning, we're allowed to vote, we're allowed to drink, we're allowed to drive, and we're meant to be an adult with a hangover.
Ben used these ideas to create a series of paintings about young men, which won him recognition and later awards. Despite these achievements, he never imagined he'd get a phone call from the Australian War Memorial asking him for his services.
I had my two babies in the back of my car and my wife sitting next to me, and I got a phone call from the Australian War Memorial asking me if I would go to Afghanistan, and they used the word deploy, and I would deploy in 6 weeks. And I knew I had no option but to say yes. It was just something that was sort of felt like such a natural progression of my work and my investigation into youth masculinity. And instantly I knew I would be able to ask these young men, why are you here? Which has always puzzled me, why a young man would make a decision that would affect their life so profoundly adversely.
I mean, you yourself always feared being conscripted.
Yeah, I did. I had a very healthy paranoia for conscription. I was born in 1973, the year after the Vietnam War finished, and Australians were conscripted to Vietnam. My uncle went to Vietnam and has never spoken about the experience. And the Cold War seemed like a very real threat to a 15-year-old boy in Sydney back then. I think it was a pretty well-grounded fear. And my mum always said, if you are conscripted, I promise you, Ben, I'll hide you in a cave in the Blue Mountains. And I thought, I'll hold you to that, Mum.
Within 6 weeks, he was on a plane to Afghanistan.
We flew from Al Minhad Air Base straight into Kandahar. And that's one of the strangest places I've ever been in my life. It's very, very dusty. It's very, very noisy. It's the busiest single runway in the world at the moment. The whole place is run by diesel generators which just thunder through the night. The runway run is active 24 hours a day, so there's constant air support right across Afghanistan for the troops on the ground. And you're just confronted by the massive machine of what is taking to run that war.
The first night you were there, bombs went off, didn't they, inside your compound?
Yeah. The first night that I was in Kandahar, 3 rockets landed inside the base, and that's sort of one of the most confronting things I've had to deal with, because I wanted to go home. And it was a pretty dark experience. They tell you to lie face down in the dust, with your hands over your head, so that you will minimise the area that shrapnel can take you out. And I thought, no, I'm not lying on my face in the dust here. I'm visual. I want to see what's happening. So I lay on my back and watched into this night sky as a rocket went hurtling over the top. But by the morning, you realise that the people that I was with that night, who had also lived through that rocket attack, had done it for 4 months and had 5 months left of their deployment, and they used humour to survive it, and on they went. And I remembered the line in my contract that said I was there to tell their story, and I was struck really pretty hard with how profound their story actually was, that this was a big thing and a pretty important job to let the world know what's happening to these people.
Ben was given access to an elite unit in the Australian Forces. He made sketches and took photographs, but more importantly, he asked them to tell him about their experiences of war.
So I asked this young fellow, what was some of the things that was sticking in his mind, and he said He'd gone to an improvised explosive device that had detonated outside a primary school, an Afghan primary school, and there was 2 little children dead outside the school when he got there, and by the time he left 4 hours later, 11 children had died. So he'd been there for 9 tiny little people dying. And I said to him, what's that doing for you? How are you coping? Are you sleeping? And he said, I'm having nightmares every single night. He then told me he had 4 of his own children, and every single night he dreamt that one of his children was dying.
Ben took the recordings of these interviews and his sketches back to his studio and set about painting. But he wasn't happy with the results, so he contacted the soldiers again and invited them to come to his studio. He wanted to get to the core of their emotional experience of war, so he made an unusual request.
So I asked them to pose naked, and then I asked them to pick a pose that they felt either represented something that they had witnessed or an experience that they'd been through. And the funny thing is, this on such a high as soon as they returned, that the first guy I asked, who was Special Forces in the 2nd Commando Unit in Australia, I thought, this could be my last day on earth. I'm asking this massive young man to get his gear off in my studio. And before I'd finished the sentence, he was unbuttoning his shirt. And I said, I'm not ready yet, mate. Wait. It'll be an hour before I'm ready to do this.
Once they were naked, he asked them to tell him about a single experience of war.
One of them picked the Battle of Marga. He was stuck behind a very low mud brick wall for 18 hours. And after 8 hours, the young man that he was with was shot by an AK-47 round that hit him just below the testicles, travelled through his body and ended up in his left lung. And for the next 10 hours that he lay there, he said, I had no idea whether one of my closest friends would be dead or not. And I said, what? Before the helicopter came in and took him out, what was he doing? And he said he just lay there saying, I don't want to die, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. And then they flew him out, and this young man then spent the next 10 hours fighting that battle, which is the Battle of Marga, which is just one nondescript, one of the hundreds of battles that these young people are fighting.
After developing relationships with several soldiers while painting them, he began to see a pattern emerging.
It became really apparent that it wasn't just about their experience in Afghanistan. It became very much about them returning to Australia and trying to cope and fit back in. And they'd come back very changed, all of them. When they're there, they're super fit, they're big, strong, in that sense, bulletproof young men and women. And they come back and they feel absolutely exhilarated to have survived that experience as soon as they return. But within 2 or 3 months, it starts to unravel. Out of 11 of the people that I worked with, 4 of them have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder in the last 12 months. And I've watched that happen, and that's been a very sort of crushing thing to watch.
It also became clear to Ben that for some of these men, the process of being painted was having a therapeutic effect. One man in particular was able to bury a past trauma.
One of the young fellows that I worked with told me when he returned, actually told me after the 2 paintings on the 3rd work that I was making with him, he told me in great detail about experience of one of his friends being shot and killed, and this young fellow's brains blew all over him, and he kept his shirt with that part of his friend on him. And only after the 2nd painting that I made of him, he rang me one night after having probably 6 or 8 beers and said, I've just burnt my friend's shirt. I said, what are you talking about? And he told me the story of having kept this shirt and finally being able to let go of it and lit a little fire in the backyard of his little suburban house and burnt the shirt on his own in a really sort of symbolic and moving farewell to his friend.
With the work now complete, many of the soldiers have come to see this exhibition of Ben's paintings. One, who can't be named to protect his identity, told me what it was like to see himself immortalised in paint.
That's you over there in that painting. Do you recognise yourself in that painting?
Yeah, strangely enough, I do, and a lot of my friends and family have. I think Ben's got a bit of a knack at really hitting the nail on the head. The pose I was in, it looks semi-contorted. I guess it shows the maybe some of the pain and suffering, I guess, of the soul of the person after Afghanistan. For me personally, it's just about having enough, just being exhausted really, and done, used up and tired.
For Ben, it's been an incredible experience to meet these men and get to the heart of what it means to go to war.
I think I just tried to tell the truth about what these people are going through. And I don't necessarily want it to be anti-war or pro-war. I think I just want it to be a very immediate response to the experience of going to Afghanistan, which is an experience that I never thought I would have and I don't need to have again.